Looking at the title of this video, you might be thinking, I thought this was a sewing channel. What's she doing talking about cabbages and weeding? Rest assured, I'm not turning into a gardening channel. Cabbage is actually a historical term for scraps of fabric, and that's what this video is going to be about. If you've ever done any sewing project, you will know the dilemma that every sewist faces. You start the project with a large rectangle of fabric, and end with a finished project and scraps. Some people toss everything smaller than a fat quarter, others keep every little scrap. I used to be firmly in the toss it category. If I didn't see an immediate use for it, or if it was too small to be useful, I'd just throw it out. Since 2019 though, I've started making an effort to keep whatever I can and use it. It's more economical to make do with what you have, and if it's a polyester or poly blend, it's better for the environment since polyester is literally plastic. But the downside to keeping all of those scraps is that eventually you have to figure out something to do with them. There's no point in saving them if they just end up taking up space and never getting used. If you spend any amount of time on Pinterest, you'll find hundreds of ideas of things to do with fabric scraps. The trouble is most of them are really kitschy and not actually super practical. So today, I'm going to weed my cabbage patch and show you 4 super easy and actually useful things you can do with scraps of fabric. One of the most common scrap projects is the quintessential hair scrunchie. It is an accessory that has gone in and out of fashion for decades, but as someone who spent 10 years in the gymnastics world, I will argue that scrunchies are always in style. Scrunchies are great, especially if you've got long, thick hair, which is what I've had all my life. Normal elastics don't always cut it for me, and scrunchies also double as a bonus fashion statement. Not to mention it's a way of taking a little bit of that special project with you wherever you go. The nice thing about scrunchies is they don't have to be super precise. You can make them as long or as short, as thin or as thick as you want. You can also make them out of pretty much any material you want, except maybe a super slippery satin. Once you have a long rectangle, fold it right sides together and stitch up the long side. After the long seam is stitched, turn it right side out. The easiest way is by using a safety pin. Attach it to one end and thread the scrunchie through itself. I'm using one of my favorite scrunchies as a guide for cutting the elastic. I'm measuring around the scrunchie without stretching it at all, so I know how much elastic to use. How much elastic you use depends on how tight or loose you want it and how stretchy your elastic is. I just used some basic sewing elastic, although looking back through the eyes of editing Lydia, something a bit stronger probably would have been better. Stitch the elastic down to one end of the scrunchie, and then you can use the same safety pin trick for threading the elastic through the tube. Once the elastic was threaded all the way through, I put a couple stitches at each end just to keep it from sliding back inside, and then the ends get folded in and stitched together. Voila! One scrunchie ready for action. I'm one of those people who needs a dark, dark room to sleep. Little crack of light, my brain pulls an Anna. The sky is awake, so I am awake. Days like that, a sleep mask is invaluable. I've had my current one for a long time now, and it has served me well. However, the elastic is shot, and I thought this the perfect opportunity to make a new one. I made a pattern by tracing an outline from my old sleep mask. It's a pretty good fit, so I didn't worry about changing the shape too much. You can use any kind of scrap fabric for this, so long as it feels comfortable on your face and over your eyes. I wouldn't recommend a scratchy wool, for instance, but things like quilting cotton, silk, velvet, or flannel would turn out quite nice. For the one side, I'm using some of my favorite cotton cabbage, and for the other side, I'm using some cabbage from my Luthien gown. I also used 3 layers of linen scraps from my Eowyn underdress for the padding inside, instead of trying to find cotton batting. I made the strap with a rectangle of cotton stitched in the same way as the scrunchie. I also threaded elastic through in the same way. To assemble everything, I layered the cotton and filling and pinned the outer layers into the middle. I stitched the whole way around with a back stitch to make everything secure. I made sure to pin on the elastic strap before stitching down the other outer fabric. The second piece of outer fabric gets whip stitched down, with the seam allowance tucked inside. You could totally do all this by machine, but I like the relaxing feeling of hand stitching. And there you go, one lovely, comfy sleep mask. This next project is perfect for people who are prone to sore muscles or who get chilly easily. I'm both. Put on a favorite TV show and I can literally spend 4 hours cross-stitching and not even notice how much my muscles are complaining until I try to get up. So for this handy heating pad, you need 1 wide rectangle of fabric, or 2 narrower rectangles. The measurements you see me use here are perfect if you just want to use 1 piece folded in half, but I quickly realized that using the measurements I read online would end up way too wide if I was using 2 pieces of fabric. So I ended up cutting it in half lengthwise. Side note, this is the one project in this video where the fiber content really matters. I mean, really matters. This has to be 100% natural fiber, ideally cotton. And not just the fabric, the thread you stitch with too. Otherwise, you throw this sucker in the microwave with polyester thread or fabric, and you will have 1 melted heating pad. And that is gonna be nasty. Before I stitched it together, I marked where I will want to divide it up. You want to break up the rice amount into smaller pockets, otherwise it will slide down to the bottom and not be very effective. I made 4 pockets, marking 1 line in the middle, then folding in each side and marking that fold. I thought I was being clever by doing it before I stitched it all together. Can you spot the problem with marking the lines where I did? Stitch the heating pad around 3 sides and a little ways along the 4th side. You want to leave a large enough gap that you can turn it right side out easily. I also used the smallest stitch option on my machine to make sure there was no chance of escaping grains of rice. Flip it right side out. This was a finicky process, and I kind of wish I had left the opening a little larger. Once it was right side out, I went back and remarked those dividing lines that I cleverly did beforehand that are now on the inside. Now it's time to fill the pad. I ended up using 6 cups of rice to get the feel I wanted. Also, don't be like me starting out here. A spout isn't enough. Use a funnel. No, not a paper funnel. A proper funnel. That's much better. Don't pour with reckless abandon or it'll overflow. Take your time and shake it down as needed. Pretend you're making one of those ASMR videos. Listen to the grains of rice as it flows from the cup, through the funnel, and into the fabric. Seriously, I don't know how people can listen to those. It makes my skin crawl. You can use however much rice you want. Keep in mind though, the more rice inside, the heavier and less flexible it will be. If you want a firm roll, go right ahead and fill it all the way up. Otherwise, spread it out occasionally to figure out how much filling you actually want. Now stitch up that little opening in the end. I used a whip stitch here, but if I make another one, I think I'll use an invisible stitch. It ended up looking a little derpy. Once the pad is sealed, it's time to divide up the rice. Spread it all out evenly and stitch along the lines you made earlier. I used a backstitch to make sure there wouldn't be any rice transferring between compartments. I also hand-stitched it because I wanted it to lie flat and even as I stitched, and I didn't want to risk stabbing raw grains of rice with my machine. Once all the compartments are stitched up, your heating pad is ready to go. Throw it in the microwave starting with 60 seconds and increasing by 30-second intervals until it's as hot as you want. Use on sore muscles or chilly toes. Okay, so I am one of those people with that awful habit of putting pins in my mouth when I'm doing a lot of pinning. This is a bad habit, and I shouldn't do it. Don't do this. But they're just so handy that way. In an effort to try and break that habit, I'm making a wrist pincushion. That way the pins are still super handy, and I, hopefully, keep them out of my mouth. We'll see if it actually helps or not. I started with the wristband, cutting it long enough to wrap around my wrist with a little bit of overlap. I folded in the edges and stitched them down. I also tucked the ends in twice and stitched them down. I measured the pincushion using a CD. Super technical, I know. I cut it out with a small seam allowance. Since it's going to get tucked inside itself, I didn't want too big of a seam allowance. Then I ran a gathering stitch along the seam line. I gathered it tight, but not completely closed. Here's another thing you can do with pieces of cabbage that are too small to use. Turn them into coleslaw. It's kind of a fun thing to do when you're watching TV but want something to do with your hands. Just be aware it does make a bit of a mess. You can then use it as stuffing for pincushions, stuffed animals, small pillows, historical hip pads. Foreshadowing much? I'm stuffing my pincushion with some of that coleslaw I made. Stuff it as full as you can. Jam that coleslaw in there, pulling the gathering threads tighter as you do so. Once it's stuffed enough and you've gathered the thread in, use the gathering thread to stitch around the gathers of the pincushion. Go around several times, pulling it inward and securing all the little folds. Pin the wristband to the back of the pincushion, over top of the folds and gathers. I stitched it on with whip stitches to make it nice and secure. Try it on and mark where you want it to close. I'm using a couple of Velcro pieces so that it can be secure but also adjustable. You could also use elastic or snaps, whatever floats your boat. I whipped the Velcro pieces all the way around and it was ready to go. So there you go, 4 easy practical projects that can be made with fabric scraps. This is by no means a comprehensive list, and if you want more ideas, Pinterest has tons. Granted, it's going to be a lot of quilted keychain fobs and coffee cup sleeves, but there are some actually useful ideas mixed in too. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up, and if you want to see more videos from me, hit the subscribe button and stick around. I have a lot more sewing projects in the pipeline that I can't wait to share.